Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and today's interview is the first in a two-part discussion, and it's focused on our guests' personal experiences, working through limiting beliefs, and helping others to do the same. Enjoy. Welcome to the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another Provider Spotlight episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. My guest today is a mom, a wife, and a CRNA who is using her own life experiences to help others who are in similar settings. Shiro Bergbauer helps other working moms in healthcare have better relationships and careers. She's been cultivating her Plan B as a life coach for over a year now, and she's been helping numerous women along the way. Shiro has a vision of helping other women realize that the life they want begins with managing their minds. Welcome to the show today, Shiro.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure. Been looking forward to this. When we canceled it because you had some tonsillitis, a couple weeks ago, I've got that little bit of a fall bug going on. So, hey, we're gonna push through this and hopefully I don't sound too bad for folks today.
It's the season. It is the season. Whatever really viruses are going around, I think we all have them.
For sure. Now, I will say most folks do have a reason for getting into their side gig, and whether that's a particular experience or a moment that leads them there. So if you don't mind, just share some of your background with us and how that has led you into life coaching.
Sure. So my story actually begins about 4 years ago, actually this week. Wow. I had my daughter in July of 2018. And as soon as I had my daughter, I had a lot of struggles. I had struggles breastfeeding. And then I found out exactly 3 years ago this week that I had postpartum rage. And the weird thing was that I had spent so much time understanding postpartum depression and sadness and all these things. And I was not sad, but I definitely had anger problems. And I'm not an angry person. I was angry at my husband. I was angry at my in-laws, who I love to death. I was angry at my best friend because she asked me a question. I didn't have an answer. And so I ended up getting professional help. And when I went and took the test, it was the postpartum depression scoring. And the lady was like, we may need to call the psychiatrist. Your numbers are, your score is very high. And I was like, well, but I haven't been sad. I haven't been crying. Long story short, I was diagnosed with postpartum rage, which is part of the spectrum of postpartum mental health issues that include postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. And so I went through that journey the entire year. And I remember being in such lows that I was like, how does one even get out of this? And I remember just having this conversation with God, and I was like, please, if I get out of this, I'm going to do something with this message. Mm-hmm. And so about maybe summer of 2019, I had just come off the first year of parenting, and I was like, I'm going to start a blog. And then I totally forgot about it. And the blog popped up in the summer of 2020. In the spring of 2020, I got a bill from the credit card company, and I was like, what is this payment for SiteGround? I'm like, what is SiteGround? So I go back to my credit card statements, and I realized I had bought a domain and had never done anything with it. And so it was like my coming out. I'm like, June of 2020, I'm like, I'm launching a blog, and I'm going to talk about all things parenting, exclusive pumping, mental health, all of that. And I love to write, but what I realized is that I wanted to talk and I wanted to like have a podcast. And so I launched my podcast with no idea where I was going. And actually one of the very first interviews, which is still one of my highest downloaded interview, was with my pelvic floor physical therapist, in which we talked about postpartum pelvic floor issues, which was another struggle that I had. And women totally, like, it resonated with so many moms. And so I started my podcast just interviewing a different specialists and, you know, who knew children. And what I learned over that kind of 1 year was that it was great to provide the information, but I wanted to have more contact. And so I went on this journey where I decided to launch a course. And the course was to help moms just navigate like mom guilt and all of that. And I took an online course training with the best of the best. And it was an epic fail.
Oh my
gosh.
And
I mentioned here for many reasons.
That's funny.
It was an epic fail. The course had 4 people buy, one which was my sister, and 2 friends, and one woman who like had literally just found me on social media. Long story short, part of the course was I was going to offer group coaching with the program because I had just started taking a certification course. I wanted to kind of get my feet wet in life coaching, which is something that had been in the back burner. And so when I didn't have enough people buy the course, I was like, you know what? I'm going to coach them one-on-one as part of their course. And the course was like, I want to say like $197. Okay. And so the funny thing is the only person who stayed consistent with coaching was the one person that I didn't know prior to this. And so this was April of 2020. In June of 2020, I hired my own one-on-one life coach. And my life coach is also a CRNA who is no longer practicing. But when I hired her, I knew she understood the exact problems that I have as a CRNA. And so you know, she understood my work schedule. She understood all of that. And so that summer when I finished my certification, I was like, okay, the doors are open. I'm going to start coaching all the people. And long story short, that is how I started off as a life coach. Yeah. Wow. It was a winding road, but we got there.
Yeah, a little bit of a roller coaster. So, and I do want to take a moment here to recognize your podcast, because you do have a wonderful podcast. Can you tell me a little bit more about that and what you do?
Yeah. So my podcast is called the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. And the reason I actually named my business that and my podcast that is because I thought about the fact that, like, as a healthcare provider, we have this one thing we're really good at, like taking care of people, right? And like the symbol of that is the stethoscope. We're so good at taking care of other humans and like being whatever healthcare professional. And as CRNAs, especially, we literally take care of the humans, right? And then you have a child. And they hand you this thing called a swaddle, and you're like, what the heck am I supposed to do with this piece of fabric? And so I wanted that to encapsulate like just the transition into mattress sense and parenting in general, which is just like, you don't know, like, what are the normal things to watch out for your kid, like postpartum mental health, breastfeeding, all of that. And so that is kind of how the podcast started. And then as I've grown as a coach, I will still have experts come and talk about, you know, certain topics, but I go deeper into the struggles of the working mom, the working parent, really just like relationships. Because one thing I figured a year into my coaching was that as much as my moms came to me because they were overwhelmed as parents, if they were struggling in their relationship with their partners, their relationships at work, we had to first solve that, like before we solved for how they could become better parents. And so it just evolved over time. And so my podcast really represents my brand because, like, nothing is off limits. We talk about everything, starting from feelings to feeding babies.
Yeah. No, I've listened to a couple of episodes. I've seen,
thank you.
You know, some of the things, and it's, I mean, truly it is about any and everything. Yeah. So, you know, if you're looking for real stuff, that's you know, it's a fascinating podcast. But now I'm one of those people that, you know, like I tend to think of the world, you know, and all of us on this planet, like we're just here trying to figure stuff out, you know, like nobody really knows anything. We're just we're trying to hold on for dear life here. And so, you know, I don't feel like I'm in any place to be handing out life advice. So, you know, how do you get over some of the feelings of inadequacy that are sure to pop up when you're talking about like coaching somebody else's life?
Yeah. So one of the most interesting things I think we don't first acknowledge, especially as CRNAs, we have a very interesting understanding of like the nervous system and the neurologic system and the brain. But like when I went to grad school, I went to Baylor College of Medicine, we literally had an anatomy lab and we had to dissect the brains and like see it. So I think we know the knowing of the brain, right? But we don't really pay attention to the feeling of the feelings and understanding our thoughts. And for me, the biggest breakthrough for me when I ventured into life coaching was the understanding that literally everything in my life is because of the thoughts that I have. And that was like mind blowing to me because I was like, what do you mean thoughts? Like, because like even now I ask my clients, like, how do you feel? And then they'll say, I feel like, and I'm like, that's not a feeling, that's a thought you're offering me. And so what I started to realize, just even like the inadequacy thoughts, right? There's always a thought behind that feeling, right? And it's usually a variation of, I'm not good enough, I'm a fraud, this is a fluke, what if something bad happens, the other shoe's gonna drop. And it's always like this idea that we are not in the right place, like almost like we got just dropped from the sky. And the way I think about it is like when you wanted to become a CRNA, like there are steps you took, right, to get there. But even then you get into the program and you're like, wait, how did I get here? And you kind of like lose sight of all the work that it took to get there. And so one of the things I have my clients do is really pay attention to like, what are the predominant emotions you're feeling, right? So if, for example, if inadequacy becomes this predominant emotion, then it's like, what am I thinking about myself that's creating this feeling? Because we have to go there. We have to go deeper and like, what do I think of me? And one of the biggest things I think as healthcare providers that we really lack is self-compassion. And this was mirrored to me very well, like the way we take care of our patients. Many of us, when we put our patients to sleep or we're taken back to the OR, we're like, I'll take very good care of you, right? And we say this to strangers that we just met like 10, 15 minutes prior. And we mean it. We mean every word of, I will take care of you. But then we are so unwilling to give ourselves that like same care. Like we are so unwilling to forgive ourselves, give ourselves grace. Like let's say even right before that, you came to work late because you were stuck in traffic and you woke up late. And it's like you're still like beating yourself up about like the fact that you showed up to work late. And here you are telling another human, like, I'll take very good care of you. And there's a quote, and I think it's by a Buddhist monk, and it just talks about like, what if like the kindness we give to the poor, what if the alms we give to the beggars, what if that was the kindness we were supposed to be giving ourselves, right? And so what I notice in our profession, like we're very smart people, we're very high achieving people, but there's this constant noise in the back that's telling us we could do better, we should do better, we're in the wrong place. And until we start to tune in to where that message is coming from, we can have like band-aid solutions, like, the whole like affirmations, I'm smart, I'm good enough. I'm like, you can't believe that you're good enough unless you question why your brain tells you that you're not. And for some of us, it comes from childhood, right? It comes from being performative as children and getting the attention from your parents because you were high achieving, you were the best kid in the class, you were this and this. And so you grow up being so performative that your worth is related to your output. Right. And so once somebody tells you, no, that's actually not true, you're just as worthy as the day you were born, it's almost like news to many of the people I talk to, because they're like, what do you mean? Like, I don't have to be a certain weight. Don't have to look a certain way. I'm just worthy. That can't be right.
No, I'm appreciating this therapy session here. I really am, because you're speaking right to me. It's amazing, but I think it applies to so many other people too. And
it is honestly it is the quintessential struggle of high achieving people.
Yeah. And what that tells me is that what you're doing is not necessarily giving life advice. You're doing something completely different with life coaching.
Absolutely. So basically, the way I think of my job as a coach is I have a flashlight and we walk into this dark room that's your brain. And I'm just showing you the little corners in your brain that have these limited beliefs, thoughts about yourself, thoughts about your like sometimes it's even like your spouse. Like people will say, my husband should know what I need. And I'm like, where did you learn that? And they're like, well, they're just supposed to. And I'm like, yeah, but where did you learn that? And it's like almost like it's been sitting this thought in their head and they think it's true. And then when we question it, they're like, wait, I don't have to believe that, right? And
Yeah.
so my job is really to show my clients their blind spots. And one of the best ways that I do this is asking questions. I ask a lot of questions.
Mhm.
And one of the biggest questions I always ask my clients is when they offer me a thought is to question it, like, is it really true? Right? Because sometimes we say things about ourselves, like we're announcing the news and it's like, oh, I'm not smart enough or so and so.
Mhm.
And I'm like, can we actually have like absolute knowledge that that's true? And when we go into inquiry with my clients, they start to discover pieces of them that maybe we're missing. And one of the ways this has been exemplified for me is actually even people's understanding of trauma.
Mhm.
And for many of us, CRNA school was trauma. It was a traumatic experience. And many people think trauma with a capital T, the sexual abuse and the physical abuse and all of that, like surviving war, genocide. But there's also going through CRNA school and being,
Mhm.
pimped every day. And so one of the things I've helped my clients just realize is even that is stored trauma in our bodies. And we have to be willing to just explore it and understand, like, why do we think those things about ourselves? Like, where did we even learn that?
Yeah, I mean, I fully understand that. I have not practiced anesthesia in 3 years.
Uh-huh.
I still have dreams about
Yeah.
monitors going off, about
Yeah,
getting lost in a hospital, trying to find my way to get to, or being late to work and stuff like
absolutely.
that. I mean, I still have these high anxiety dreams, and I haven't been in the profession for 3 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's real. That stuff, it can have an effect on you. So
Yeah.
I think
And I
it's
have
amazing that you have to
clients,
bring that out,
who are like the smartest people. They were class valedictorians,
Mhm.
smart people. And they'll tell me about this one thing that happened. And now they don't think they're a good CRNA. And I'm like, I don't understand. Like, I haven't touched an OB patient in 11 years of practice.
Mhm.
And you do OB every day. I'm like, how can that not even make you a 10 out of 10?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and,
So
and
it's
that
like
is
I'm
it.
literally selling them on themselves.
We are conditioned to be, very negative about ourselves and our abilities. And, I mean, that comes from testing, that comes from the nature of the profession, because you really have to strive for some sense of perfection, because if you're not, then you have a patient's life in your hands. And so
Absolutely.
that is a level of stress that many people do not understand. But that's where, like, you're making a difference as a life coach with other CRNAs and people who have these experiences, because you get it. You've been there.
Yeah. And I get somebody questioning your anesthetic or a surgeon yelling at you and you making it about you. And that's some of the things that I coach my clients on. And they'll come back and tell me, like, oh, I had a similar incident with a surgeon and I just like felt compassion for the person and I
Mhm.
didn't get pissed off because they're now understanding, like, what does an unregulated nervous system look like from the surgeon's perspective. And they're
Mhm.
like, oh, this is just a person with an unmanaged mind. I don't have to engage them. And
Yeah.
then they're like, who am I? Like, what is happening?
Oh, man. Well, and
Yeah,
I mean, and for you, I mean, any of us can go out and like we kind of figure some things out, and it's like, okay, well, I want to, now I want to be a life coach, and so I'm just going to start calling myself a life coach, and I'm going to tell people I'm going to help them out. But there's, as you mentioned, there's a lot more to it. There's some certifications that you've pursued and some things like that. So, can you go into a little more detail about how you prepared yourself for stepping into this highly personal field?
yeah. So life coaching is actually a very unregulated industry. The barrier to entry is very low, right? And so you don't even have to be certified. You can just one day wake up and decide you're a life coach. And there are people who are amazing life coaches who didn't have major training. But I think for me, I kind of wanted to at least dip my toes, understand like what it involves. And even though, like, I have an ultimate goal, which is to go to the life coach school and get certified by the life coach school to get really good at their tools that they use, but I use different tools.
Mhm.
So I took a course with Transformation Academy. I got my certification, and then I was like, okay, I also want to experience coaching, like with my own coach,
Yeah.
so that I can be a student of the work. Because I had been
Mhm.
self-coaching for over 2 years. I had gone through the life coach schools, self-coaching scholars. They have a program. I learned how to coach myself. I literally dump my brain every morning. I check the thoughts. It's like I wash my brain every day.
So
And
this
so
was
I
a
was
much
already doing that.
yeah, this was a much longer process for you then.
Absolutely. Yeah. So by
Wow,
the time
okay.
I was going out in the world and telling people about coaching, because I think the life coach school came into my sphere about 2019. So I had been self-coaching. I had been trying to change different things. So I was definitely a student of the work, and I was seeing myself evolving as a person, and I was seeing areas of change. But for the first time in my life, I've always been like a self-help junkie. Like I've always read the books and listened to podcasts. But for the first time in my life, I was trying to change myself from a very loving, compassionate place, where I was giving myself permission to make mistakes. Like I was accountable to myself. And I actually remember the first time my coach, I was talking about losing weight, and she was like, you don't have to be mean to yourself through this process. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, if I'm not mean to myself, how will I stay on track? And she was like, no, you will stay on track because you're going to be in kindness. So I started exploring self-compassion. I got deeper into like understanding my husband, getting better in my marriage. And so when I started like really focusing on who I wanted to coach, their struggles were very familiar to me. And I have been very vulnerable about my own, struggles and my own growth as a person, that my clients have felt that I got them, that I understand them. Like we'll joke about stuff, and I've been through those things.
Well, and let's talk about that a little bit though, because I mean, no two people are the same. So obviously you have to do some catering to different personalities. And I mean, I noticed that you are probably very type A because you have your books in order, color coded behind you, which people watching this on YouTube will see. And it is a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
I love it to death. But, obviously you're going to deal with people who aren't quite like that too. And so, how do you go about feeling people out so that you can properly coach them up?
Yeah. So the first part of working with me is a free 1-hour consultation. And on that call, I really just want to understand how the person makes decisions. So I'll ask very like deep questions and write a lot of notes. I just want to see like, how do you make decisions about your relationship? How do you make relationships about your money? Because the one thing that we don't realize as humans, how we decide in one area of our life is really how we decide in every area of our lives. So even from that, I can gauge like, what are their personality types? Are they willing to take ownership of their behavior? Are they willing to at least hear? Are they open to getting coached? Because coaching, like people assume it's like me telling you what to do. And coaching is me, just like we're driving down the highway and my job is to tell you that there's a truck on the right lane, like stay in the lane, right? Or don't exit this exit. And so I have to at least get that about you. And so I already have a feeling of the dynamic. I ask a lot of questions. One of the things I think that has been so fortunate for me, which is a blessing and a curse, my brain stores a lot of like little details. And so my clients will tell you, like, I know their kids' names, I know their spouses' names, like I know the people who are important to them. And that is very valuable to me because I want to connect with them from a very like intimate level, because they're coming to me with things that maybe they don't share with other people. Right. And they're coming to me because they can be vulnerable. They can tell me how mad they were with their husband. And then I can help them like from a very compassionate, curious place to see why they're showing up the way they are. And like, we can manage their minds. And that's really what mind management means. It's like, can you monitor the thoughts that are persistent in your mind? Can you even explore feelings? One of the things I'll tell you, Bobby, is adults don't understand their feelings.
Well, and I have
like
to echo that because, like,
yeah.
well, and I struggle with this with my kids because it's like, okay, well, we need to work through your emotions.
Yeah.
What does that even mean? Like, there's no instruction book that says, okay, well, this is how you work through anger. This is how you work through frustration. This is how you work through disappointment. Like, I mean, well, maybe there are. Maybe
there are, but
there
here's
are plenty
the thing.
of books, but
as humans, we want to bypass all those emotions, right? If I told you today, okay, you're going to feel sadness for 2 days and then you're going to feel excitement for a day, you'll be like, no, skip the sadness, right? What we don't realize is that life is really 50-50. Like you will always experience, and I don't even like to call them negative emotions. I call them uncomfortable emotions. And you can experience positive emotions. The other thing that we forget is that there's this duality of like, you can be really, really sad and grieving. Like you can even be going through intense loss, and then you look at your kid and you feel intense joy. And I think we forget that we have those resources to like really go inside. One of the things I will tell you, Bobby, is, and I think I had it right here, is my daughter and we talk a lot about feelings. But what I've realized is if we start from a young age to help our children identify just the way their sensations feel in their body. So it doesn't even have to put a word to it. I think we put too much meaning into a word descriptor of an emotion. What I usually just have my daughter do is like close her eyes and tell me where she feels the most like thing coming up. And so you'll learn, like with kids, like sometimes sadness just feels like their chest feels hot, right? And learning to understand that. The way I like to do it with my own clients, which they're all adults, is if you were describing what you're feeling to an alien, what words would you use? Does it have a color? Does it have a weight? Does it have a shape? And what my clients start to realize is, even when we talk about emotional eating, right? People think emotional eating is eating a tub of ice cream when you're sad. Emotional eating can be like when I would go to my favorite hamburger joint to get fries because I was bored. Because in my body, boredom and sadness feel the same, and hunger, they feel the same. It's a pit in my stomach and it needs to be filled. And so by understanding just like our own emotions, we can be like, oh, that's what sadness feels in my body. This is what anger feels in my body. I can start to name that. And then I can start to decide like, okay, I can feel this intense sadness because it won't last forever. And going back to something you said about all of us as human beings, we do have a bias towards like negative, right? Like that's how our brains are primed. And so our job is to really teach our brains that it can experience negative. The other thing I want you to realize, Bobby, is our brains, like the reason we're here as a species is because our ancestors were like, fear was important to get them here, right? Like we wouldn't have survived if our ancestors were like, let me just go out of the cave and see if there's a lion. Like they had to have that like fear.
Yeah, so I'm going to go pet the kitten.
Yeah, we got here, and there's our primitive brain, which is like our limbic system and all of that. It doesn't realize we don't live in a cave anymore, right? So when your patient's heart rate drops to 0, your body doesn't know if there's a lion outside the cave or it's actually a patient dying. Like your body is just like fight or flight, like release the norepi, release the epinephrine. And so we get deeper into that, just understanding. The other thing that is so important is that our brain has this like system, and it's a human motivational triad. It's how we stayed alive. And it's 3 things. We avoid pain, we seek pleasure, and we conserve energy. That is just our default.
Yeah.
So now what we learn in coaching is you don't need to seek pleasure when you're sad. You don't need to go eat that whole tub of ice cream, right? You can just sit with that emotion. You don't have to conserve energy because you don't want to get up and do the hard thing, right? You don't have to avoid discomfort by like, you don't want to have a conversation with your partner because you don't want to feel upset. You just like face that emotion head on.
Yeah. I've been fortunate enough to interview a few lifestyle coaches lately, and I can certainly say that each one of them has their own vibe. Shiro is really focused on figuring out the why for her clients, often leading them on a journey through their own emotions. And I can just tell that helping others discover themselves is the type of thing that truly feeds her soul. But Shiro could only do this work because she took care of herself first. She has her own life coach and has done the hard work of self-reflection. And as they say, you can't pour from an empty cup. That's it for this week's show. I hope you'll join me next week for part 2 in our discussion, as we'll get more into the business side of life coaching. I've put Shiro's contact info in the show notes, so make sure you check that out. This is Bobby Jones signing off, and as always, be safe and take care of each other out there. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On-Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. Feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On-Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.